Yo, it's your boy DJ Elgin Bokari, man, and thank y'all so much for being here at PocketCon. I'm so excited today because we're actually going to be interviewing Tim Samuelson today, which I'm extremely excited about. Tim is the curator of this amazing gallery that is happening at the Chicago Cultural Center downtown. Let's just take a moment. Tim, how are you doing today?
Doing okay, thanks. Thanks for coming by.
It is an honor to be here with you today. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us, and your gallery is amazing. First off, you want to just tell us a little bit about the show, a little bit, and how you got into this background of working on curating comics for this and curating spaces for the Cultural Center.
Well, I think for my part, it's a story that could probably be repeated, and most people who are interested in comics is I was a comics nerd from way back, following the funny pages and following getting the comics at the corner store and whatnot. So this goes around for a long time, and I've been very lucky in curating this show along with Chris Ware, who actually I think is really, I give the credit for making this show what it is.
Absolutely.
He's not only a great historian of comics, but he is also a cartoonist himself and a really celebrated graphic novelist.
Absolutely.
And so this was a rare opportunity, and of course it fulfilled kind of a life's passion of Chris to be able to put the story of comics and Chicago's connection to comics on the wall of a museum where you could actually share the story. And in doing this too, Chris has this, from his own work as a graphic novelist, he really knows how to tell a story. And basically he has taken that ability to tell a story on a piece of paper and bring it into 3 dimensions, into an exhibit. So in some ways, it is almost like a giant 3-dimensional cartoon presentation by Chris Ware, rather than a formal old exhibit where you kind of, look at a picture of something and then look at the caption, look at a picture of something, look at a caption. That's meant to draw you through it, through using modern technologies of enlargements, which now you can make giant vinyls and take something that's this big and you can make it 8 feet tall, which we're able to do.
Which is amazing, because if you've got a chance to actually check out the gallery and see the space, right as you're coming in, I think the first thing that usually stands out to me when I first go to the gallery is that big, huge comic book sign that's right off in the beginning. That's like jumping right at you. And I mean, also, some of the things that have really captured me when checking out the gallery right off the back is you get when people think comics, I think right off the back they think, they think Buck Rogers, like when we're talking about the 1950s, 60s and stuff like that. But then as you're walking through, you start to find some amazing art that was done by the Chicago Defender, which I'm extremely interested about, talking about a person by the name of Robert Abbott, who, after checking out the gallery, and I did a talk earlier with Stanford Carpenter, was actually one of the main editors and the creator of the Chicago Defender. What was it like finding these gems of like Robert Abbott and their
some of the
work?
Jay Jackson, and Wesley Rogers, and a lot of the cartoonists. Well, certainly one of the most important publications in African American history is the Chicago Defender.
Tell us more about that.
And it was a newspaper that started out really modestly. In fact, it was one of several black newspapers in Chicago. Robert Abbott started right after the turn of the 20th century with just a modest little office. In fact, there's the story that he had a desk that he had scrounged from somewhere, and part of it was supported on a brick. But he really put out a powerful paper that was a really heavy-hitting journal of issues of the day for not only African American community of Chicago, but branched out nationally. And so it became a paper that was widely distributed. It was actually taken clandestinely to areas of the South, by Pullman porters who would take it and drop it off at places into communities where that paper and its very strong civil rights and protest journals would not be well received. And it was a premier journal in the period of 1910 to 1920 in starting what we call the Great Migration from the South to Chicago. There was a Chicago edition, there was a national edition that would have news of communities around the country, and it also developed into different features, which include women's pages, children's pages, but also significantly comics features.
Yeah.
And so that's the pioneering aspect that is one of the many things that the Defender is known for, and really what would be considered the first African-American drawn comic for an African-American audience was done by an artist named Leslie Rogers. And this was called Bungleton Green. And it's a strip that started out as it started out as a daily strip where it would be a series of horizontal panels that told a joke, but also developed into part of a color comic that would be on a Sunday. So, or actually on a Saturday for the edition of the Defender, because the Defender was able to evolve and have color presses. And so the Sunday Funnies kind of thing had its own counterpart with the work of Leslie Rogers. We actually have been able to reproduce in the exhibit is a reproduction of an actual Sunday color page. And these are kind of hard to find. In fact, had to find what was available in kind of what were originally microfilm copies, but being able to recreate the color to get an idea of what this was like. Now, this early example of Bungleton Green is basically telling a humorous story about an automobile accident. And there's kind of a joke at the end of it, which is a typical kind of funny pages thing. But Bungleton Green, over a period of time, evolved through the hands of Leslie Rogers and other artists into in some ways, almost like a science fiction kind of fantasy storytelling. And
see that one more time, actually?
Certainly. So this is an example. It's very kind of cartoon-like. And so this is I believe it's 1928, and we so this is actually a giveaway. So if you come to the exhibit, you can actually take away a sample. Think of it, so it would be like carrying away an actual newspaper comic supplement like you would years ago. And in it are different examples of other comics that originated in Chicago. The theme of our show is where Chicago, where comics came to life.
All right.
Because what's different about Chicago, and what's different of how like Bungleton Green evolved and other comic features, is originally people thought of comics and newspapers as being there's a joke involved. So basically, it's one day's installment. It sets up a joke, and there's a punchline at the end, and it's meant to laugh at. But Chicago evolved making comics that were about real life and putting in topics that were of concern. Serious issues would be incorporated into the comics, and also it evolved into stories that continued as a serial from one episode to another. So it becomes like an early version of a graphic novel. So you would read this comic feature every day and find a continuing story rather than one. And also with the Chicago Defender, you had many of the artists, and I think one who's featured very prominently in the show is Jay Jackson.
I'm a big fan of the work that I saw done by Jay Jackson.
Yeah.
I learned a lot coming into this show, and I hope that more people take the time to come and see this. Tell us a little bit more about what draws you to Jay Jackson's work.
Well, Jay Jackson was a cartoonist who literally did everything. And so if you can pick up a copy of The Defender from the 1930s into the 1940s, you will find Jay Jackson would do comic features. He took over the Bungleton Green comic. It was no longer a comic that's just kind of a joke panel,
Right.
but one that had continuing stories, ones that brought up issues of racism in interesting, hard-hitting ways. But also, in terms of running a newspaper, there's also the editorial cartoons, which are single panels, which your challenge in that is to convey issues of the news and current events in a powerful, symbolic way with a single panel cartoon. And Jackson did these as well. He created multiple comics of their own. And in fact, we have numerous examples and original examples of his work.
I would have to say, like, Jay Jackson's line work was so clean. His penmanship, like, all the work, like, even the displays that you have actually inside the gallery are so striking. I love the one, and the way that he was able to convey African American, even female skin through the shading elements. Like, you can see the melanin popping out, even from, just by the way that he shaded, using something as simple as black and white.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Jay Jackson is we have several examples of his original work in the show. And if you look at this is a piece of original art of Jay Jackson's. And if you look at the work of many cartoonists, one of the things that you will find is that you will find corrections where a line went awry or there's a mistake, and you used a chalk white, like a whiteout, to correct it. You can look at these Jay Jackson drawings, which are really complex drawings, and none of them have a correction.
Wow.
None of them.
Wow.
And the other thing that is interesting with Jay Jackson that he was really good at was, especially, he had a panel called Home Folks. And Home Folks is the story of a modern black family with multiple family members. And he was really good at drawing multiple figures with multiple scenes of action in the whole comic. And because it's portraying a family, he was able to make each person in it have a very distinct personality.
Wow.
Just like you'll have very distinct personalities in your own family.
Absolutely.
And so there's your dad's personality, your mom, your uncle, your brothers, the uncle that shows up. And he was able to convey this, and he was really good at drawing people where the personality of that person really comes out. And also with the idea that when you read one of these Home Folks comics, you would say, whoa, that's just like my dad. Or, oh, why, there's my crazy uncle, or anything like that. This was one of the real geniuses of Jay Jackson's work. The other thing that he also, on the side of doing comics, is in terms of doing editorial cartoons and doing things for the comic pages, he was in demand as a commercial artist for doing advertising.
Oh, wow.
So you will find sometimes in The Defender, in addition to an editorial cartoon by Jackson, a comic panel by Jay Jackson, you might find an ad for Murray's hair pomade drawn by Jay Jackson.
It's wild to know that Mary's has been around that long. My dad used to use Mary's hair cream to get those waves. For those of y'all don't know what Mary's is, it's a hair cream used to get nice waves. But yes, that you wonder who did the artwork on the block on the can. Most likely it was Jay Jackson.
Yeah, well, Jay Jackson worked on doing the ads for that, but the original design of the can was another famous artist, Charles Dawson, who did a lot of graphic work as well. But Jackson did a lot of the advertising for Murray's.
Now, there's another person who's really striking in the gallery that I want to talk a little bit about. That is Jackie Orms. tell us a little bit about the curation. You guys got like some of the original dolls that she had helped to create. Her work is in for those who may not be up to speed about who Jackie Orms is. First, you should actually tell why, but also tell us a little bit about the curation and coming into with some of her work into this show.
One of the, certainly in telling the story of Chicago comics and Chicago comics in the African American press is Jackie Orms, who often people think of the, back in the day, of the comic artists being kind of a guys' club.
Is it really?
Well,
there's a lot of guys that are involved with comics. I don't know.
In the old days, yeah.
Yeah.
And even today, there's talk about.
It's better.
That's a whole other discussion.
It's better, but there's still some issues, I would say.
There still are issues with it, but there are the pioneers, and Jackie Orms is one of them. And in terms of her comics, which actually were joke comic single panel, but they often had interesting kind of hard-hitting background to the content of those as well. In fact, one of the lead characters is Patty Jo, and Patty Jo's just a little kid, but has she got attitude? It's great. And so you deliver this, and she's got her hands on her hips, and she's delivering a line that gets right to the point, and it's some really sharp and perceptive art, and it's some really sharp and perceptive writing.
Yes,
I mean, it's really got a lot of things going on at once. It became so popular that actually a doll was made, which we actually are very lucky to have one of the original dolls.
How did that come about? How did you all get this? Were able to get this doll into the show? Like,
well,
what was
a lot
that
of
like?
the work. So there was a woman who had actually done research on Jackie Orms and had, really did a lot of work in tracking down her work and her legacy, and gathering original art and gathering the dolls. In fact, she's very protective of the fact that doll has traveled all over in terms of exhibitions, and the owner was hesitant to actually lend the doll out again, but she really saw what we were doing with this show, and it was like, well, okay. Right. So Patty Jo travels again, and we were really happy to have Patty Jo. I mean, there she is in 3-dimensional. There's even stories that Jackie Orms was so, and this is another artist who is very good at portraying nuances of facial character and expression, that she insisted on doing the painting of the faces on the Patty Jo dolls. And
so she painted all those dolls?
That's according to the one story that she wanted, because to catch the sense of the eyes, which is hand painted on the doll.
Yeah.
And the eyes are a really important part of conveying expression.
Absolutely.
And if you look at a Patty Jo cartoon, those eyes in many cases tell it all. That she was, Jackie Orms was not happy when the people who were making the dolls to paint the eyes that would convey that personality that was so essential to that character. And so she painted it herself, which is quite an interesting thing. I don't know of that happening with any other cartoonist who had commercial products and toys made.
Talk about intellectual property.
That's true.
Making sure that each one felt special.
And anybody who thinks that they're going to go on eBay and find a Patty Jo doll, you're not going to find it. And if you do find one, get ready to put out some really big money for it, because it's really rare.
That's why I'm so surprised that you all actually got a copy of one inside of the show. So if you all want to see a Patty Jo doll, you have to come and see the show, because that is the way you're going to see it for right now. So come to the show just so you can see this doll in its glory. So we also have Daniel Day, another. And before I move to Daniel Day, I like to point out some of the some of the textures that I see in some of the artwork that's being created. Also with Jackie Orms, I love the way that when she is coloring her characters as well, it's more of like a smudging type of. I wonder if it's like any watercolor that's involved to like convey some of the darker tones, because we're talking about people who are coloring or doing renderings in black and white and still able to convey characters of color within a black and white page, so I was really interested in, like, it's a difference between what we just saw with Jay versus Jackie and how they do their work.
Right, well, certainly anyone who works in cartooning knows that there are a lot of tools that you are able to use to create your art. And the things that you can see certainly in Jay Jackson and Jackie Orms is one, in terms of making the basic line, it is how you use your pen. And so this is pen and ink, and this is a pen that you would use that would have different nibs. And also, you have pens that have the ability, depending as you're drawing, how much you press down the pen onto the paper, the thickness of the line. And if you want to convey like motion, you can have a line that will start out very thin, and then at the point of where elbows are, you push the pen and it gets thicker, and then you then move it, and then it thins out again. And this is something that I think is often people who look at comics, they realize the effect of this, but don't really look at it in detail to see what it takes to coordinate your hand and your pen to create that. Now, there also is in making comic features of people of color, how you represent that in a black and white illustration.
Yes.
And it is something that you can often see in the history of comics, where you see white cartoonists drawing black characters, where it is done in a very heavy, exaggerated way.
Well, in that time, I'm sure that there was some very exaggerated ways. I mean, we don't need to have a conversation about blackface, but also even in superhero comics, because this comic book convention that you're a part of right now, comic book PocketCon is a celebration of characters of color. There is a documentary that I will always recommend. It is called White Scripts and Black Supermen, where you have a lot of like our first Luke Cage and the Green Lantern, John Stewart, Black Panther. They're always drawn in such a fantasy of what they think the black experience would look like. So you have all these 70s and 60s characters with these huge afros and hyper masculine, super muscular, and they're either angry or or super aggressive. And to see these characters in this gallery being shown just as like normal, like just your everyday black character, or like you can look at some of these images in this show and be like, well, that looks like my aunt, or that looks like my cousin, like these look like normal folks. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, but that's exactly the point. That is what is the great contribution in terms of Chicago comics in general, but also the artists who, particularly I think Jay Jackson and Jackie Orms, is portraying real everyday people that you can relate to, and people each with their own personality and is distinctive from one another. Also, in terms of how the work is, in the case of Jay Jackson, it is a very subtle but effective use of pen shading with line art. But another thing that there is also on a cartoonist work table, which Jackie Orms was good with, was in doing ink washes and shading. And so this is actually a diluted ink with brush. And so brush comes into cartooning quite a bit, where people think it's just pen and ink.
Right.
But that gives you a shading. There's other things that show up in some of the cartoons in terms of overlay to create a dot in some of the Jay Jackson pieces. There is what was a transparency that you could put, that were shadings that you could put over it. And you find that Jay Jackson in particular was very good with creating shading, both for clothing and background and whatnot. And it's setting up the figure with a background as much as it is creating the figure itself. And these are something that is part of the art itself. Yes, the thing that you notice is the characters and their distinct personality, but it's also how you present them, their character, their perspective has a lot to do in how you perceive and respond to the comics. And that is something that is something that's worth calling out, that once you bring it up and you start noticing things like this, like how you manipulate the pen, how you manipulate shading, where you use washes and where you use brushes, the more you can appreciate these comics.
It's something I also saw coming out of a lot of Daniel Day's work as well. He's another one who also picked up Billington Green, the series as well, and has done a lot of work with him as well. So I was really interested in a lot of the stuff that I saw him do as a cartoonist as well. Daniel Day's work, I like his sense of cross-hatching. He uses a lot of dark like lines and features and stuff like that too, which is, I feel like, especially even today, a lot of artists have issue with making something look a little too dark, you know? But I think that Daniel Day, especially as an early cartoonist, was able to convey some of this work as well throughout with some of his stuff too.
Right. Well, I mean, even if you look at some of like the early Bungleton Greens, the way the shading is done in Leslie Rogers' work, it's kind of an exaggerated way of shading. Now, Daniel Day is interesting in that one of the many features that Robert Abbott incorporated into the Chicago Defender was a children's section.
Oh.
And actually, it was a special page or pages, especially for children. And this was actually, part of it was the Billiken Club, Bud Billiken, which is the origin of the famous Bud Billiken parade.
Which is, I literally just found out a little while ago. So yeah, if you're wondering where that came from, there you go. You can thank Chicago Defender for that. Now, there was originally a character that was attached to this.
And there was a little kind of a little character, and it's Bud Billiken. And Billiken was actually created as a good luck symbol, actually before the time of the Chicago Defender. And Billiken was the god of things as they ought to be.
Hey, come on now.
I mean, that's a good god to have.
Yeah.
Because things aren't always the way they ought to be. But
very true.
And it turned out that one of the editors of the Defender had one of these little Billiken dolls sitting on his desk.
Oh, wow.
And that then informed the creation of the Bud Billiken character. But it had reporters and news features that were written by kids in the neighborhood. In fact, Willard Motley, the famous novelist, at one time he wrote under the pen name when he was very young, under the name Bud Billiken for the Billiken section. But also, you had basically a teenage cartoonist, and that was Daniel Day.
Wow.
And so he started out very young, drawing specially in fact, this is a reproduction. If you come to the show, be sure to pick up one of these souvenir takeaway comic pages, because there's actually but wait, there's more bonus inside, which is a little mini comic of Daniel Day's work. And he went from being this very young teenage cartoonist for the Chicago Defender, but wound up graduating into doing editorial cartoons, other features, taking over existing strips. But here you can see his work, and that's free for you to take away. This little comic he did called Spotty, but he did other things as well. It was interesting with Daniel Day because he was well known for being this kind of boy genius and drawing this cartoon when he was a teenager, then graduating into the regular newspaper features.
Wow.
But then he disappeared. In fact, when people were writing about Daniel Day, we found things and people said we didn't know what happened to him.
Oh, wow.
He went into the military and actually then wound up drawing for military-related comics.
Wow.
And he achieved great fame in terms of as high up in the military in terms of in rank and administration work, and was really quite celebrated for that, to the point that when you read about even his obituary, we found, when he passed away, that people wrote about him in terms of his military work and achievements, and they forgot about his cartooning.
No way.
So it's like Daniel Day had two different identities, and both of them are very important and set important precedents.
I think he took the Chicago Defender thing to the next level. I think he took, see what I did there, because he's in the military and he was in a comic book magazine called Moving On.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it goes, from a boy cartoonist drawing, a joke feature to doing, including serious editorial work for the Defender. He also did work that was commercial advertising work as well. But then using that ability to create comics that would appeal and looking into the interests and issues confronting soldiers and in military life. And then that's taking that into his work in creating important precedents and milestones in military management history.
So we're wrapping up this conversation, but I want to ask you an important question. As a man of your privilege and everything, why is this work important? Why include the work of the Chicago? Why is it so important to include the work of the Chicago Defender in a gallery space in the heart of downtown? What is the passion behind making something like this happen?
I think there is a main reason in doing this show is that there are cartoonists and publishers, and if we're talking now about the Chicago Defender and African American cartoonists in particular, but with cartoonists in general, is that throughout Chicago's history and the history of Chicago comics, there are people who had an important voice.
Yes.
It's a voice of another era. There are people who were very trend-setting and courageous and important and influential in what they did. And very often, they are forgotten.
Yep.
Daniel Day is forgotten. You mentioned Leslie Rogers or even Jay Jackson. People don't know because their work hasn't appeared for many years, or it hasn't been put into anthologies like it should. So the important part of this show is to give the voice back to the people who are no longer with us, and be able to let them speak for themselves and what they did once again. And we don't want it to be a preachy, here's what this is. The way this is presented is the power of their work can stand on its own just as it did years ago, and both inspire people in a timeless way, but also a way to look back and see how things evolved.
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to wrap that up. I really appreciate you, Tim, for taking the time to meet with us today. This has been such an amazing talk. If you had to do a last, few seconds pitch to get people to come to this gallery today, for one, I hope that this has been enough, absolutely, to get you getting down here. But if you had to do one last second pitch to get people down here to see this gallery, what would you say?
There's things here that you're not going to see anywhere else. It's going to give you a whole new appreciation of comics. It's going to give you a whole new perspective on a forgotten aspect of comics history through the African American press. And you get a free comics page to take home with you.
Come on now, tell them again.
You know, this is good salesmanship here. So, you know, not only you see a show, you get to take some of it home with you right here. Chicago Cultural Center, Chicago Comic Show. Come on down.
Absolutely. My name is Elgin Bokari. Thank you guys so much for checking out this gallery and also for just having a conversation with us. This has been such an amazing time. Thank you guys so much for messing with PocketCon, and I hope you have a great rest of your virtual convention. This gallery will be up for...
I think we've extended. I think we're into January 6th.
That's right. You got into January 6th to come and check out this gallery. It is well worth your time. Thank you so much for rocking with PocketCon. We'll see you guys soon.